Welcome to this week's message from Anthem Church. We're so glad you're joining us online today. Our prayer is that this message encourages you, strengthens your faith, and helps you take your next step in following Jesus.
So, here we go. When I was little, a lot little, like small, I used to be Batman. And I know some of you are judging hard right now, but I know that some of you were Batman too. Some of you might have been Robin. Some of you might have been Superman. Some of you might have been the Hulk. I had a small little phase of the Hulk, but the little skinny guy didn't quite fit the Hulk kind of order of being. But Batman was my thing. I can't remember, in 10:30 when my parents are here, they might remind me. I feel like I had a Batman suit. It might just have been a Batman t-shirt. I'm not sure. But any which way, whenever I put that on, I was. Now, for those of you that don't know about the superheroes, Batman was the only superhero that didn't have a superpower. But what he did have was he had mastered every single one of the martial arts. I mean, that's cool. So imagine walking into any room and knowing that you can beat anybody. That was me. And so I would walk around in my Batman suit, and I would walk into any room, and I would look for, I don't know what imagination would go, but Batman fought criminals and crime and fought the injustices of the world. And I think there is something acutely in our DNA certainly as little boys, and I think as little girls as well, but I don't know how that plays out. I don't know, was there Batwoman? I can't even remember because I was just focused on Batman. But there's this thing in us when we're little that we want to be the hero and fight injustice. And I don't think it's some kind of fantasy that little children have. I actually think the reality is it's the image of God. And so what happens is we're little and we run around without fear and we think we can take on anything and we put on our armor, whichever suit it is, our Batman or our Superman or our Hulk. We put on our armor and we think we can do anything and we imagine it and we desire to be that. And then as we go through age, as we get older, as we mature, it starts to look like, jeepers, okay, I tried to do that and there was a bit of a backlash and a little bit of cost that came to me fighting injustice. So maybe I mustn't fight injustice in that kind of way. And then as I get a little bit older, it's like, okay, that injustice, fighting that injustice is going to cost me a little bit of money. I don't know that I want to do that. And then I kind of fight again and I want to press forward, but then it starts to cost me some relationships. And then I think maybe I should back off from fighting injustice. And then I want to fight in another way and it starts to cost me in my marriage. And I start to think, maybe I should just back off of injustice. And slowly what happens is we become a bunch of people that in the image of God, that thing has been so blunted and dented and shut down that we don't wear our Batman suit anymore. And so today what we are launching is this series called Hidden, where we're looking at people that you may not know their names. Because whenever we think of courage or whenever we think of these scriptural stories and the people that would fight the injustices of the world, like we come to David and we think this incredible leader, and before he was king, he was able to take a sling and a stone and just perfectly land it. And then we think, okay, well, maybe I'm not so good with a sling and a stone and I might break the glass window and then get shouted at by somebody. Tried, done. So we think, okay, well, maybe the sling is not the thing for me. Then we're going to be like, okay, well, maybe Moses is the guy that we're going to talk about when it comes to courage. I mean, honestly, who just goes like this and the water parts? Who just goes like this and water comes out? And so we think Moses, and we think, but I don't have those supernatural powers. How can I be this courageous person? We think of Esther, who in her incredible courage goes to speak to her husband, who happened to be the king, who happened to also be able to put her to death. And we think those aren't really our stories, so how can I relate? How can I be this person? How can I be the DNA of God, the image bearer of God? How can I be Batman in my adult world? How can I be this person that fights injustices when I'm not like David, and I'm not like Moses, and I'm not like Esther? And I think God does this most beautiful thing. He includes these stories in the record of the history of humanity so that ordinary people like you and me can actually stand encouraged. And so today we're going to talk about this. Well, we're starting a series called Hidden, but today specifically I'm focusing on hidden courage. And my goal is this today. My goal is that you're sitting there, that something of the little boy or the little girl would be awakened in you. Something of the image of God that has been so wrapped up under the fear of what others may think or what it may cost, that something of that may start to strip off a little bit, that you could just take one step forward in courage today to be the superhero you were made to be. And so, Jesus, we pray that by your Spirit today, as we look at stories of three people, you would help us, you would ignite something in us, awaken something in us that we know has been there but has possibly been quenched because of life experiences and what people have said. Our desire is that in the fullness of life that you came to give us, Jesus, this thing of fighting the injustices and the unrighteousness of the world is a major component piece of who you've made us to be. Would you help us today? We pray. Today I'm going to be talking about three people, two that acted in the same together. They were partners and one separately, but one had the courage not to act and one had the courage to act. And I think in different contexts, we need to be able to have both of those. We need to know when not to act, and we need to know when to act. We need to know when to keep silent, and we need to know when to speak. Here's the sad reality of our human existence today, is most often we speak when we shouldn't, and we keep silent when we shouldn't. We keep silent when we should speak, and we speak when we should be silent. And so let's look at two stories. The first is these two ladies called Shiphrah and Puah. Who's heard of them? Okay, very few of you. That's fine. It's found in Exodus chapter 1, this story, and they are Egyptians, but they are midwives. So their very training, they have decided to go into a profession that brings life into the world. What a beautiful profession, to aid in bringing life into the world. And this is who they are, and they're Egyptian. And what happens is a very insecure man who's known as the Pharaoh, who is known as the king of Egypt, who has been suppressing the Israelite people who have been growing in under their kind of kingdom, under the Egyptian rule and kingdom. And he starts to fear that his throne is under threat, that he might be at jeopardy because this Israelite community, this Israelite nation is growing and there's more people and it's just like it's ridiculous. And so he starts to put more and more pressure on them, and he starts to drive them 7 days a week, 24 hours a day in manual labor. And he thinks that by doing that, the men won't have a sex drive anymore. Didn't quite happen that way, and the Israelites start to produce more and more babies. And so under the instruction of the king of Egypt, these two ladies, Shiphrah and Puah, are instructed by the king, the one who is in political power over them, to say, when you go and attend to these Israelite women giving birth, if it is a male, you are to kill them. And so these two ladies, it's not even a thought. Not even a thought. And we read in Exodus 1, chapter 17, and this is how it's recorded. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They feared God and did not do what they were instructed to do. The first heroes in the story of Exodus chapter 1, as Israel are about to prepare to be set free from their captivity into their promised land, which kind of sounds very much like Jesus. I've come that you may have life and have it to the full. So we're able to see the parallel, which I'll link through as we go. But there's this moment where the first heroes aren't warriors. They aren't kings. They aren't princes. They aren't rulers. They aren't leaders. For the purposes of this conversation, they're just two very ordinary people who would serve to bring life into this world. And under the instruction of an unrighteous act, they have a decision to make, because they know that the king of Egypt has every political authority and power to put their lives to death, to put them to death. but they choose to fear God. See, the problem with fear, so if they had feared Pharaoh more than they had feared God, what would have been the outcome? And this is something of the problem of fear, is that it always creates obedience to something. If you fear people, you will obey people. If you fear culture most, you will obey culture most. If you fear losing approval most, you will obey approval most. You will do things that get your approval most. But when you fear God most, you become free to obey Him. See, I know that today we're not necessarily being asked to kill babies so much, but we are pressurized to compromise. We're pressurized to stay silent on matters of unrighteousness. We are pressurized to laugh at what dishonors God. Look at your Netflix history. We are pressurized to normalize what God calls wrong. We're pressurized to participate in systems that damage people. We're pressurized to prioritize our comfort over convictions. But what hidden courage looks like is it starts to say this. It starts to say, I can't participate in that. I won't say that. I won't compromise my integrity. And I answer to a higher authority. And so the first thing we see from the story of the two ladies is that hidden courage requires us to fear God more than we fear people. And so today, maybe just the Spirit of God, allow the Spirit of God just to start asking you questions. Do you fear God more than you fear people? And that fear is not this, it's not a negative word. It's a reverence word. It's like, do I revere God? Do I consider Him worthy of my obedience more than other people would be considered worthy? The second thing that we see from their story is that sometimes courage is just quiet resistance. Sometimes it's just quiet resistance. They just simply refused cooperation with evil. You know, the kingdom of darkness often advances because good people quietly cooperate. What Shiphrah and Puah did in this situation is they quietly resisted. Bringing the kingdom of God, making decisions for God, having this hidden courage doesn't always look like going to war with something. It doesn't always look loud. It doesn't always look like there's this massive victory that gets paraded. It doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it's just a quiet refusal. Imagine history and how different it would have been if they had chosen to quietly cooperate. And even though it was against their conviction, they could have gone, but I was made to do it by my king, and no reasonable person would understand the position they put in. We'd understand that they kind of go like, but you shouldn't have done that, but I can understand the pressure of political power who had the ability to take your life. And most likely would have. We understand the predicament. We would give you some mercy in that. Imagine they had chosen that road. Moses, the deliverer, would have been killed. Israel wouldn't have had their deliverer to bring them into freedom. And so two ladies, who most of you didn't even know their names till this morning, have given us, as believers in Jesus Christ, the privilege of a nation that we get to be grafted into living under the blessing of God. Two ladies that we don't know made a decision not to kill Moses, and God took care of Moses' life. Sometimes hidden courage looks like a quiet resistance which you may get no glory or credit for in the moment, but shapes generations. Shapes generations. If I can encourage you with a little personal story, today is a very significant day for Jax and me. Today, 3 men in my family are preaching a sermon. I am preaching here. Jed is preaching, my eldest son is preaching in Mozambique somewhere this morning, and my second eldest son, Rourke, is preaching at youth this afternoon. Because there's been a quiet resistance. We haven't got it all right. Please don't, that's not the moral of the story. But we try to. And there's a quiet resistance to the culture of the world, and there's a quiet resistance, and we've made some decisions which haven't made us popular with our kids. But a generation is starting to get shaped, and the word of God is starting to be declared that's going to live beyond Jack's and me. Today is an incredible day for us as a family. God does it. But what are these little decisions that we are getting to make? We may never preach to thousands, we may never lead a movement, but every act of integrity, every refusal, your faithfulness, your private obedience, all preserve something far bigger than you may realize. Number 3, their courage protected vulnerable people, which means that our hidden courage, actually some of its purpose, some of this DNA, this image of God, is to protect vulnerable people. Pharaoh saw Hebrew boys as threats. The midwives saw them as image bearers. And the spirit of Pharaoh, the spirit of king, the king of Egypt, is still very much alive today to dehumanize us, to discard the weak, to exploit those because we can. Because people are desperate, we can exploit them. We can oppress them. But what the people of God are called to do is to protect the vulnerable. Proverbs chapter 31 verse 8 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves." Hidden courage protects children. It protects the overlooked. It protects the weak. It protects the marginalized. It protects the silenced. And that is difficult because when we side with the vulnerable, we are putting ourselves into the position of weakness, and most often in human circles, that means that we are putting ourselves at odds with the powerful. We're going to get to Jesus, but just a little heads up. When we get a correct view of Jesus, we realize that we're never in the position of weakness. Because the one who has defeated the enemy, the one who's conquered death, is actually the most powerful one. And so we can side with the vulnerable. We can position ourselves in the vulnerable, knowing that the Almighty and the one who is all-conquering and all-powerful, that one is the one who also sides with the vulnerable and will side with us when we make those decisions. So who around you, friends, needs protecting? Whose voice is missing in the rooms that you're a part of? Where are you being asked to quietly compromise? So these two ladies had this quiet courage to not act when they were instructed to act unrighteously. So we shift now to a story where someone had the courage to act against unrighteousness. And his story is found in Jeremiah chapter 38. And there's this guy called Ebed-Melech. Know him? No, you're lying. You don't know him. Unless you're a part of the preaching team meeting on Tuesday. This guy, Ebed-Melech, is a eunuch. I don't need to explain what that is, right? A eunuch. Like, let's just say he's been made a man that's been turned into not a man. He has no social status. He's an Ethiopian. He's a foreigner. He's a servant in the house, in the palace of the king. Like, this is a guy that literally has zero standing in society. Zero. He is an object. He is property. To be treated as property would be treated. And this is what happens. There is this moment where Babylon is attacking Israel, or it's about to happen. And Jeremiah, who is a prophet, he's a man that hears from God, and God uses him as a spokesperson to tell Israel like how they should behave in certain matters, etc., etc. God speaks to Jeremiah and says, actually, Jeremiah, you need to tell the king to give themselves over to Babylon because I have chosen this. If you surrender and give yourself over, you will spare your life. But if you try to fight, you are going to be decimated. You, the ladies, the children, Israel is going to be wiped out. And there are these arrogant princes in the kingdom who think that they know better than God. And so they don't like what Jeremiah is saying. And so they want to shoot the messenger of the message of God. How many times does that happen? And as the princes go to the king and they say, there's this guy, Jeremiah, and we know that what he's prophesied in the past has been true, and this is just ugly he's prophesying against his own people. And the king says, okay, we'll do with him whatever you want to do. And so they throw him into a cistern, and they say no food so that he'll just starve to death because he can't climb out. A cistern is a well. And it had no water in it, and so he was just stuck in the bottom of this well. But this guy, Ebed-Melech, he's in the king's palace, and he overhears this, and he understands this. And he understands that he has no position in society, no position in the king's palace. And yet, under incredible courage, he goes to the king and he says, these princes have behaved wickedly. I mean, imagine saying that to the king, knowing that, like, literally your head could be taken off. And he says, these men have, the princes, your sons have acted wickedly. And the king hears him, and there seems to be, like, it's not said explicitly, but there seems to be a little bit of repentance in his heart. And he goes, okay, take some men and go and rescue Jeremiah. And so Ebed-Melech goes, and he goes into the dungeons under the palace, and he gets what he says, a whole bunch of old rags and clothes, so that Jeremiah, we don't know how many days he's been in the cistern. We don't know how weak and frail his body's become. But there's one sentence which says, Ebed-Melech was able to get rags so that Jeremiah, the rope wouldn't cut into Jeremiah's body. God doesn't waste words. And so when he says that, you've got to go, wow, like, this is a deep move of compassion. Like, even in the midst of rescuing somebody, there was compassion not to harm him and hurt him further. That's remarkable. So that's just a little aside. But this is the story. And so Ebed-Melech goes and rescues Jeremiah. And so the things that we can learn out of this, hidden courage speaks when silence would be safer. Silence would be safer. Hidden courage does not stay neutral when righteousness is being buried. We don't get to say, this isn't my problem. Can I say that again? As image bearers of Christ, as every single human being is, everybody, created in the image of Christ, as image bearers of the God of heaven, we don't get to say, it's not my problem. What is taking place in the Middle East, we don't get to say, it's not my problem. We may not necessarily be able to put on our Batman suit and be there and fight injustices, but you've got to believe that in prayer, the Spirit of God will be able to unlock in us what is our part to play. Where can we use our voice? Sometimes courage means speaking up in the meeting. Sometimes it means defending someone being slandered. Sometimes it means confronting an injustice. Sometimes it means advocating for truth. Sometimes it means standing beside someone who's been abandoned. Hidden courage. Ebed-Melech, I'm so grateful for him. Silence is often easier, but courage to speak. The second thing that we see as courage is compassion in action. Before pulling Jeremiah out, I've just said that he got rags and cloths so that the ropes wouldn't tear into Jeremiah's skin. See, real courage is not harsh. It's not always cutting off Goliath's head with his sword. It's not always sinking a stone into a forehead. It's not always harsh. It's deeply compassionate. Not because... So often you can tell if someone is trying to be the hero of a story for their own glory or for the glory of God by the compassion that's extended in the moment of heroism. The thoughtfulness that goes into it. This is what people remember through their lives. Who defended them? Who stood beside them? Who helped carry them? Who handled them gently when they were hurting? Number 3, God sees hidden courage. Ebed-Melech is easy to overlook in the biblical narrative, but God doesn't. God includes him. In fact, Ebed-Melech gets more verses than some of the kings of Israel in the records of the kings. And so God is very attentive to those that are not turning blind eyes to unrighteousness. God is very attentive to the eunuch who's an Ethiopian and a slave in the house. He's very attentive to the ones who have no standing in society and yet are prepared at the very cost, the potential cost of their life, to put themselves forward to be able to speak on the behalf of righteousness. God sees hidden courage. And in Jeremiah 39, this is what Jeremiah is able to say back to Ebed-Melech. On behalf of God, I will save you because you trust in me. The Israel king, the princes, the families, they all get wiped out because they don't follow what Jeremiah said. But this man stood for unrighteousness, Ebed-Melech, and God saves him. See, the world rewards visibility, but God rewards faithfulness. And so although you may feel unseen, serving quietly, protecting quietly, obeying quietly, resisting quietly, heaven notices this hidden courage. And so what we get in these two stories is this, that courage sometimes refuses to do something, and sometimes courage intervenes in something. And then we may ask ourselves the question, okay, so we've got Shiphrah and Puah, and we've got Ebed-Melech, and we kind of got these incredible stories. How do we become those stories? How do we start to write our stories like that? How can we be more progressed in our story? Maybe we've even started the journey. Well, we've got to understand who Jesus is in this whole picture. Because Jesus says, come and follow me. And so when we follow Jesus, what happens to us? So how does these people that we read about that didn't know Jesus, but they did fear God, how is it better for us? I'm so grateful that Jesus, in the same way as Shiphrah and Puah, he didn't need to stand up. He could just have a quiet resistance when he was being accused by the Pharisees and by the Roman rulers. He could just have a quiet resistance. And then likewise, how does he act when it comes to the acting out on behalf of? Well, I'm so grateful that he was not scared to heal people on the Sabbath. What was considered unrighteous was supporting life. So the midwives, they didn't sign up to kill life, they signed up to bring life. Ebed-Melech, he stands up so that Jeremiah's life can be protected. Jesus stands up and says, I don't care what day of the week it is, you can come with all your rules, you can come with what you think is righteous or unrighteous, but what is righteous in heaven is restoring life. And so if that person stands before me on the Sabbath, if that person stands before me at 10 p.m. at night, if that person stands before me at 3 a.m. in the morning, if that person stands before me, I'm going to do what I can to bring life. Hidden courage that nobody has to know about. Doesn't have to go on our social media feeds that this is what we did. Jesus refused evil without compromising, and he stepped into our pits as he did as Ebed-Melech did with Jeremiah. And so we follow him because he is faithful where we have compromised. We follow him because he is courageous where we have stayed silent. We follow him because he is compassionate where we have stayed distant. And so what now, friends? What now? Just a couple of things and we close this out. 5 things to think about. Decide now who you fear most. Here's the reality. Courage is not spontaneous. Courage is based deeply on your convictions. And so if you can pre-decide who you fear most, when the moment arises that you're under pressure, when the moment arises for your Batman suit to come, by conviction you can act in the way that you should. Decide now who you fear most. Are you going to fear the voice of men? Are you going to fear the voice of society? Are you going to fear the voice of your boss? Are you going to fear the voice of culture? Are you going to fear that voice more than you will fear the righteousness of God? Decide now who you fear most. Number 2, small acts of faithfulness matter. They matter. God does not just tell the stories of David and Moses and Daniel in the lion's den. He tells the story of 3 people whose names we hardly know, who just made a faithful decision not to put this boy to death as he was birthed, and not to put this boy to death, and to rescue some prophet in a well. Your small acts of faithfulness, our small acts of faithfulness. Every day we make a decision to stand up for righteousness, whether it's by quiet resistance or whether it's by active participation in fighting against unrighteousness. Whichever way it is, the small acts of faithfulness add up and heaven celebrates and remembers. We don't need the platforms. We don't need the applause here on earth. But God remembers. He's writing the story. Number 3, don't confuse silence with peace. Our silence doesn't mean that it keeps peace. John Stott says this. Talani, there's actually a quote just coming up below this now. We are to submit right up to the point where obedience to the state would entail disobedience to God. But if the state commands what God forbids, or forbids what God commands, then our plain Christian duty is to resist, not to submit, to disobey the state in order to obey God. This is the strict meaning of civil disobedience, namely disobeying a particular human law because it is contrary to God's law. Whenever laws are enacted which contradict God's law, civil disobedience becomes a Christian duty. A little aside, as a pastor, we prayed in our prayer meeting several months ago about a meeting that was taking place amongst parliamentarians who wanted to have state control of religion. It's been passed. It is not inconceivable that a year would be too short, that it is not inconceivable that 5 years from now, we will be making some radical faith decisions that the state will be trying to shut us up and put us to behave in a certain way, and we're going to have to choose who we fear most. Sermons like this aren't just good for a day, friends. They start to form us and shape us because we have a real world that is railing against Jesus and what he stands for. Number 4, courage and compassion belong together. And number 5, God sees what nobody else notices. God sees what nobody else notices. Friends, today, because of Jesus, we have the one who has conquered death and gone through that and has been raised to life forever to live for intercede for us. So we have one who is more powerful than the most powerful thing any human can do to us, which is take our life. We have one who is more powerful than that, which means that deep inside of us, if we can get a good view of eternity, it means that we will have the courage to stand up against the unrighteous, whether through quiet resistance or whether through action. We will be able to stand up when we get a view of eternity that has been opened up because of Jesus. And all of us who stand within the saving work of Jesus Christ have an eternity with our Father opened up and secured. And so because of that, we can be courageous. We can pull out our Batman suits from our cupboards, friends. Maybe you need to retailer them because they might not fit. But that's okay. We can put them on again. And we can start to fight the injustices of this world. We can start to stand up against an enemy that is pressing and robbing people of life. Because Jesus came that we may have life, and as a community that has received the life of God, our responsibility, our very mission, the very thing that we've been created to is to glorify God for the life he's given to us and to be able to help others into that same life. What a privilege that we can be superheroes. What a privilege that we can stand up against injustices without fear of what may happen. What a privilege. And this is the story that Jesus invites us into. Maybe the greatest acts of courage in your life will not happen on stages, but they'll happen in conversations, in decisions you make for your kids, in quiet refusals, in moments when nobody's watching but God. Maybe those are going to be the biggest moments of hidden courage being released.
Thank you for watching today's message. If you'd like to take your next step with us, get connected, or find out more about Anthem, visit our website or reach out through the Church Center app. We'd love to walk the journey with you.